Okay, now we're recording. So I'll say that thing again, which is, before we get started, I'm just going to lay out all the directions, and those are that I'm working through all this code. I don't have solution code that I'm looking at. I'm not pulling this from memory or copying it from somewhere. I'm going to be working on this live with you, and every so often I'll be asking all of you for help and input. That's for the audience at home. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. Okay. Can everyone see okay? Visibility good? Cool. Okay, so I've got the two folders opened up. I'm going to look at Stopwatch first. So here's the README for Stopwatch. Setup. I'm assuming that I've done the setup stuff already, that I'm all set to go. I've pulled from upstream. I have all the files. Okay, from the beginning. For this assignment, you'll be helping to complete an in-browser stopwatch app. Okay, I kind of know what a stopwatch is, so I think I have an idea of what that's going to mean. Let me read on a little more. So its specified behavior is when the start button is clicked and the stopwatch isn't running, the stopwatch starts running. Additionally, if the stopwatch is not currently running after it's been clicked, it looks like I need to show stuff in the browser. So it looks like those are two separate steps. There's the thing of like setting the stopwatch running and also secondarily updating the browser. If the stopwatch is already running, nothing will happen. So that doesn't mean I don't have to necessarily write any code there, but it does mean that if I click the start button and the stopwatch is already running, it should just be an empty click, like click, 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 and should not affect the behavior at all. When the lap button is clicked and the stopwatch is running, a new lap record will appear on the list of laps at the bottom of the page. Okay, bottom of the page. So this is talking about stuff in the DOM, in the UI. But it's also saying a new lap record. Record sounds like something that would happen on the data level of the application. So maybe this involves both of those things. And the stopwatch is not running, nothing happens. If we click lap while the watch is stopped, we don't want to create a new lap record. Okay. When the stop button is clicked and the stopwatch is running, the stopwatch will stop running. That makes a lot of sense. Additionally, when the stopwatch stops running, it stops updating the display. Okay. If the stopwatch is already stopped, which is like the stop button is clicked and the stopwatch is already not running, resets the time, resets the display, and it looks like it resets or erases the list of laps. Okay. So I have three buttons with which to interact with this application: start, lap, and stop, and they each kind of behave in those different ways. Okay, let's read a little further. So that's the feature spec. That says, how should the app as a whole behave? So the team who built this already, they have three separate objects that govern all of the different things: stopwatch, display, event handlers. Okay, so let's read about each of those. Stopwatch holds the actual logic. And that kind of makes sense. Stopwatch does stopwatchy things. That means it maintains a state. Huh. What does that mean? Anyone think they know what that might mean? Maintains a state. If you don't know, that's okay.
Maybe it's whether it's stopped or whether it's running or...
Mm-hmm. That's right. State just means that there's some data that's there. That if something is stateless, it doesn't store any information. So if you have a state, that means you're storing data. So in this case, we're storing whether or not the app is running. It's also responsible for managing the time on the watch. So like as seconds go up. And performing basic actions like starting and stopping the timer. Okay, seems reasonable. Keeping track of and creating lap records. Okay, so lap records. I saw that before in the feature spec. It looks like I'm going to want to include lap records somehow inside of the stopwatch itself. Okay, reading on. Display is responsible for showing the data managed by Stopwatch in the browser. So Stopwatch manages data, display shows stuff on the screen. Okay, that's a good thing to know. Changes the time display and changes the lap list. And the third one, event handlers, is event handlers. That seems pretty intuitive. Okay, we have more detailed specs. I'll look at that in a second. One method's been provided. This method calls itself every 10 seconds as long as the stopwatch is running, and call update values each time. You guys learned a better way to do this today, but I didn't want you to have to muck around with that doing the stopwatch. Create a working application, and the rest is just submitting instructions. All right, so at a high level, I think I'm going to have these three things, and they're going to have to interact in order for the stopwatch to work. I'm going to have stopwatch, which is the application itself, the core application, which is the data. Display, which is the interface, and event handlers, which is also, I guess, part of the interface, but it describes inputs, whereas display, it looks like, describes outputs to the application. I think that the flow of this is going to be, I get an input, I do something with the application, I display something on the screen. So input, processing-y thing, show, output. So that means that probably the flow of this is going to go from event handlers to stopwatch to display. Event handlers will probably call stopwatch and display. Stopwatch will probably be calling display at some point. Display probably shouldn't be calling anything else other than itself or doing stuff in the DOM, because it's just taking the results of everything else and showing them on the screen, at least as described here. Okay, so we have this kind of high-level overview of the app. Let's take a closer look at the specs. I'm going to start with event handlers. Event handlers, because they deal with input, they're generally closer to the description given in the feature spec. Because the trigger for the event handler is the same thing that's written as the condition in the feature spec. If the stopwatch is not running, starts the stopwatch. If the stopwatch is already running, it does nothing. Okay? That seems straightforward. So I think I'm going to have an if statement in here, and if the stopwatch is not running, I start. Otherwise, do nothing. Same for on-click lap, it looks like. If the stopwatch is running, record a lap and do some other stuff. Update the display of laps. Otherwise, do nothing. If the stopwatch is running, stop the stopwatch. If the stopwatch is not running, reset the stopwatch and update display. Okay. Stopwatch specs. I'll just take a quick skim through these because this one's a little bit long, but it looks like the methods that are available on stopwatch, that need to be available on stopwatch, are things like reset, start, stop, and lap. And these seem like the kind of core behaviors of the underlying stopwatch machine. It can start running, it can stop running, and it can record a lap. And it can reset itself. Update time values. I don't know what this necessarily means. Update time values increases the number of milliseconds by 10. Okay, so this increases, it moves the time forward. If the number of milliseconds reaches 1,000, it resets milliseconds to 0, and it increments the number of seconds. Okay, so this means that if I hit 1,000 seconds, or milliseconds rather, I need to change that back to 0 and increase that to seconds. If the number of seconds reaches 60, it resets the seconds to 0 and increments minutes. Okay, so I think I kind of get what is going on with update time values. Every 10 milliseconds, it's moving the time on the clock forward. And if we reach a time that doesn't exist, like you can't have more than 1,000 milliseconds without having a new second, it corrects that so that we have seconds or minutes instead. But it's kind of breaking that apart from milliseconds into seconds and minutes. And then it updates the browser via display. Okay? So I think I largely get that. And advance the clock, this was provided, so I really don't need to look at the spec. Unless I need to use it for something. And the last one is the display spec. I have 3 methods here: zero fill, update time display, and update lap list. These two say updates. They probably involve drawing stuff on the screen, making sure that the DOM is kept up to date with the underlying data of the application. It says it displays the value of minutes, seconds, and tens of milliseconds elapsed in the DOM, called in the element time display in the format 000000. Okay, so it should be something like that. It should be laid out that way on the page. And it pads the values of minutes, seconds, and tens of milliseconds with zeros so that the strings are at least 2 characters long. Okay. Interesting. So I need to do some funny stuff with displaying the data. Not changing the underlying data, but displaying the data so that it shows up probably to look like this or something like that. But how do we do that? That doesn't sound like updating, right? That sounds like I might want to call some other function. Update lap list. Updates lap list. That looks pretty straightforward. Displays each element inside an LI and shows minutes, seconds, and milliseconds, just like in time display. Okay, let's go back up to zero fill. This is the third one. We haven't looked at this spec yet. Zero fill says if number has fewer digits than length, it should return a number as a string, padded on the left with zeros until the length is equal to length. Okay, so update time display talked about padding stuff with zeros, but it seems like update time display may call zero fill in order to actually pad those values so that it can render stuff on the screen. And if the number does not have fewer digits than length, it should return number as a string unaltered. So I guess that means that if length is 2 and number is like 100, that means it should return a string 100. I think that's how I interpret that line. Okay. All right, so I've read through all of the specs. Let me try and figure out where I begin. Inside homework.js, well, okay, HTML and CSS, this has been built for me, so I probably don't need to do anything here unless I want to customize it. So homework.js is probably where I need to spend my time. Okay, so there's some comments in here, and it looks like these are my 3 objects: stopwatch, display, and event handlers. So where do I begin? Well, honestly, I think I could begin with any one of the 3. I'd probably want to start with an object as a whole as opposed to one specific method, and then just like cherry-picking random methods, although that could work, potentially. But I think it's possible to start with any one of these. Which one do you guys want me to start with? I'll put the Richie, this is being recorded. I'll put the 3 different objects here in Slack, and I'd like you to thumbs up which one you think I should start with. It's like a choose.
Wouldn't be starting with the user interface, or never mind.
You can. You don't have to. There's a justification for starting with any one of these. Starting with the display means you can easily check. You can see what the output is right away, so it's very simple. Starting with the event handlers is also fairly easy to test. You just put in console log statements and see if they fire. And then you can mock up calls to other functions. Stopwatch also makes sense to start with because stopwatch is pure logic, so you don't need to worry about doing any DOM stuff. You can just try managing the data and seeing if you can get the data to be stored correctly. If you don't start with application, what you need to do is you need to fake out the data that it has while you're working on other components. So you need to pretend as if the underlying logical part of the application, the stopwatch, is producing the data that you need. So an argument can be made to start with any one of the 3. It looks like folks want to start with event handlers for the most part. All right, so let's start there. Cool, event handlers. On click start, on click lap, on click reset. I'm going to pull up the event handlers spec and split that off to the right. Okay. So here's my spec, and here's the event handler's object. I'll start with on-click start. If the stopwatch is not running, it starts the stopwatch. If the stopwatch is already running, it does nothing. Okay. What does it mean for it to be running? Well, it looks like stopwatch has a property called isRunning. So I can probably reference that in order to make my decision. I don't need to write any more code on stopwatch in order for that to work. So let me try that. I'm going to start with on-click start. Oops. So it says if the stopwatch is not running, if stopwatch is not running, that's a fancy way of writing if, oh, that should be stopwatch. A fancy way of writing, is it false or is it falsy? But it kind of reads like English. If not running, do something. So in this case, if it's not running, it starts the stopwatch. Well, I think the method for starting the stopwatch is going to be start. So I'm going to put that in here. It also looks like it doesn't, that function doesn't take any arguments, which is good, because it means I don't need to worry about passing anything in. Okay. If the stopwatch is already running, it does nothing. Well, I think I've got that figured out. If the stopwatch is running, this is going to be false, and so we're not going to enter the if statement, so nothing will happen. Okay, let's go to on-click lap next. On-click lap, if the stopwatch is running, do some stuff. If it's not running, do nothing. All right, well, that sounds like the same kind of thing that I just did. So I'm going to do if stopwatch dot is running, and otherwise nothing. Otherwise do nothing. So if the stopwatch is running, what should it do? It should record a lap, and it should update the display of laps. Okay. So recording a lap, I don't know what that means. I'm going to put in a placeholder. Update display. Okay. Oh, and I'll do that over here too, just as a test. All right. I've actually, I should really stop here before I move on. I'm going to open up oh, no, that's not right. Yeah. Oh, why is this Git? Damn you, Git. Go away. Okay. So I'm going to open up the HTML file. That way I can start to see what I'm working with here. Okay, so it looks like I've got my starting page. That's looking all nice and pretty. And I'm going to pull up the inspector because I'm probably going to want to poke around with this. Ooh, not super responsive. Oh, well. Or maybe I'll even pull this out in a separate window, actually. That's not a bad idea. Okay. So if the stopwatch is running, it records a lap. Let me just test that one first before I move on. So when I click start, some stuff should happen. It should say start stopwatch and call stopwatch.start, which at the moment does nothing. All right. So let's see. Does anything happen? Uh-oh. I've got a problem. I shouldn't move forward yet. What's the issue here? What do you guys think is the issue?
The event handlers from the very bottom, the ones that make the buttons work.
Yeah, what about them?
You haven't defined them.
I did define them. I defined them right here.
No, there's some other ones, like on line 67, we were supposed to have the event listeners.
You're right. There is a note here. It says set your event handlers. Well, I've already defined them, but setting them is different. Setting them means making them properties of certain elements. So set your event handlers. Okay. Let's see here. So we want an event handler, I assume, on the start button. So if I take a look in here, oh, start button, conveniently enough, has an ID of start. So I'm going to say document dot query selector okay, that should get me the element. And how do I set an event handler again for just a DOM element, a vanilla DOM element?
Can't you just do like .on?
Let's try that. Okay, refresh.
Doesn't look like it's gonna work.
On click start is not defined. Oh, that shouldn't be just on click start. It should be event handlers dot on click start, because that's where the function is defined. Okay, save that, refresh. Okay, we can get rid of that error. All right, so let's click the start button. Still not working. I thought I did it right. I'm grabbing the right element. I think I'm grabbing the right element. Maybe I'm not grabbing the right element. Let me check. If I go into the console and I run document query selector start, does this grab the right element? Yeah, it looks like it does. What if there's something wrong with the function itself? Maybe the function isn't running. Well, let me try calling the function. All right, event handlers dot on click. Oh, actually, I can't do that. I can't access these methods from here in the console as such, because they're hidden inside the window.onload function. And when you're inside a function, people outside can't see in. But there's another way that we can do it. I'll throw up a debugger statement, not a dubger. Okay, the debugger statement should allow me to run through all of this code, and it'll stop as soon as it hits this line. That'll give me an opportunity to poke my head around within the scope of the function. All right, let's give that a try. I'm gonna refresh. Okay, so I'm here at the debugger. I've just executed a whole bunch of code defining all this stuff. So let me jump over to the console. First of all, am I seeing document? Is that working? Okay, document query selector still works. That's working here. What about on click start? All right, event handlers dot on click start. All right, so let's call this function, see what happens. Well, that works, huh? So we're grabbing the right element, and our handler is good. Why isn't it working? Sean, you said add event listener. Oh, did we add the event listener incorrectly? Maybe. Okay, sure. Let's try doing that. That seems a little long, though. Is there a shorter way we can do it? Well, all right, I'll do an add event listener. I want to listen for a click event, and the function that I'm going to give it is event handlers dot on click start. All right. I'm going to comment out the debugger and see if we can make the code run. So let's refresh the page. Hey, it works now. Cool. Oh, you know, I just remembered there is another way to do this. It involves setting the thing directly. So what we could do is we could write document.querySelector start dot on click. Right, I forgot about that. There's a property that I can set. And I think that's what add event listener is actually doing under the hood. You know, though, there is something to be said for this, because this means that I don't need to remember all those different methods, or properties rather, for changing all the different things. I can just have this one method that I can call. So that's actually kind of nice. Maybe I'll keep that way. Idea, I think, because it means that this handler function is actually a method on the element. That might be important at some point. Okay, cool. So this is working. Awesome. Let's do the same thing for lap. So I'm gonna copy this because I'm a developer, which means that I'm lazy, and so I'll change that to. Actually, I'm gonna change. Can I change both of these? Not easily. All right. So make that lap, and on click lap. All right, this setup worked for the previous one, so I think it'll work this time. Let's refresh and try it. All right, start still works. I'm gonna click lap. Oh, stopwatch, it didn't do anything. But maybe it's because the stopwatch isn't running. Yeah, so by default, stopwatch is running is false. So let's actually just change that. Let's set stopwatch dot is running to equal true. That would allow us to test whether or not this is working. Oh, shoot, we need the debugger to do that. Keep forgetting. All right, so here's the debugger. We're inside the window.onload function. So I'm gonna try setting stopwatch is running to true. Okay, no problems there. I can change a property on the stopwatch. So now that it's true, if I were to do on-click lap, oh, it's event handlers dot on-click lap. All right, let's see what happens when I call the function. Oh, it did some stuff. Great. So if it's running, it did the stuff. If I set this back to false, will it still do it? No. Okay, cool. That actually lines up with what the spec says it should be. So let's go ahead and let this run. I'm gonna release the debugger so that we're back in the main window. Okay. So we oh no, I shouldn't have done that. One more time. I'm gonna set is running to true, just so that we can test that lap is working. Hey, cool. All right, nice. Okay, so that's all good. Let's move on to on-click stop reset. I think we're going to want to use the same setup for on-click lap. So this is going to be stop reset. And stop reset says if the stopwatch is running, it stops the stopwatch. All right, well, I think I know what this is going to be. If stopwatch dot is running, stops the stopwatch. And that's it. That's what it does there. If it is not running, it does some other stuff. So I'm going to need this to be an if else. So if it's not running, it should reset the stopwatch. And it should update the time display, and it should update the lap list display. At least according to the spec, right? That's kind of what it says over here. All right. So let's test this one the same way that we tested lap. We've got our debugger, but I'm gonna refresh the page just so that we can make sure that that works. Okay. So debugger is on. If I come into here and I set is running to false, well, I'll set is running is to true first. So stopwatch dot is running equals true. Okay, so if that's the case, if I call event handlers dot on click stop reset, let's see what happens. It should print stop stopwatch according to our code. And it does. Great. Now let's try it the other way. Update time display, update lap display. Cool. That's what we expect to see. So I don't know necessarily how to complete all of those steps, but I do know that the handler is going to do them as long as I issue the command in that place at that time. Okay. I would say that the handlers are mostly done at this point. We'll come back to them to actually link them up to the rest of the program, but they're kind of doing the thing that we want them to do. So let's leave them alone for a little while. Okay, so what's left? What do people want me to work on next? We've just done event handlers, so we still have stopwatch and display. So give me a thumbs up for which one you want me to work on next. In Slack, sorry, a Slack thumbs up, thank you. Okay, so you want me to work on stopwatch next. I think I agree with you. And the reason I think I agree with you is that it means that we can see the impact immediately of the event handler. Most of the event handlers do something, all the event handlers do something to the stopwatch. They do not all necessarily do something to the display, although I think they might actually. So maybe you could argue to go either way, but sure, let's go to the stopwatch next. So I'm going to close up display. We'll look at that later. Okay, stopwatch. Let's pull up the stopwatch spec. Okay, I'm going to skip over advance the clock. This is provided code. Okay, and I'll skip over that here too. Cool. So I've got update time values, reset, start, stop, lap. Okay. I'll start with the top. I don't see any reason why not to. Okay, update time values. What does it do? It increases the number of milliseconds by 10. That seems straightforward. I can see milliseconds over here, so I'm just going to say this dot milliseconds increase by 10. Cool. Okay. Next. If the number of milliseconds reaches 1,000, it resets the number of milliseconds to 0. It increments the number of seconds. Okay, well, the if kind of says to me, if statement, if this dot milliseconds equals 1,000, that's what it says. What does it do? It resets the number of milliseconds to 0. Okay, so this dot milliseconds equals 0. And it increments the number of seconds. Okay, so that means that I want to take seconds and increase that by 1. So I'll increase seconds by 1 when that happens. Okay. Cool. Next, it says if the number of seconds reaches 60. All right, so that sounds like I need another if statement. If this dot sex equals 60. What does it do? It resets the number of seconds to 0 and increments minutes. So it's going to be pretty much the same as this, actually. It's just we're going to be doing it with different values. So this is going to be secs, and this is going to be mins. Okay, and it looks like we don't roll over minutes to hours or anything like that, which kind of makes sense. We're not timing things on the order of hours, so we don't necessarily care about that. Cool. And it says it updates the browser via display after adjusting all time values. Whoa, we're not touching, we haven't done anything with display yet. Based on the name of the method, I think I'm probably going to be calling update time display, but I don't know what that does. So I'm going to just put in a placeholder. I'm going to say console.log update time display. Okay, and I'll fill in that bit later. Okay, cool, one down. Moving on, reset. It resets the number of minutes, seconds, and milliseconds to 0. Cool, that's a nice easy one. Arg, go away, Google Calendar. So that is going to be minutes, seconds, milliseconds. This dot mins equals 0. This dot secs equals 0. This dot millisecs equals 0. Okay, cool. I think that satisfies that one. It resets the list of laps to be empty. Okay. Do I have a list of laps here? Well, actually, yeah, I do. It looks like I have an array inside Stopwatch called laps. I'm guessing this is something used to store all the different lap records as I create them. So it looks like when I click reset, it's going to empty that whole array out, which I think means just making it a new empty array. Like we'll get rid of all the elements and say, okay, you had lap records, but now you don't. It doesn't say anything about manipulating the display. That doesn't mean I don't necessarily do that here, but it doesn't specify it. I might come back to it later if I need it, but for now I think I'm going to leave it be. Okay? Next, start. The stopwatch is not running. It sets the state of the stopwatch to running. It calls advance the clock in order to start the ticking of the clock. Okay? It sets the state of the stopwatch to running. I think that means this dot is running becomes true. It calls advance the clock. Oh, this method that I have. Okay. Oh, but wait, I forgot. If the stopwatch is not running, so I need to have an if statement in here. If right, because if I didn't have that if statement in there, it would do it every time. But the spec explicitly says I should only do it if the stopwatch isn't running. So in this case, I'm going to set this dot is running to true. And I should also call advance the clock, which is a method that I have. Bam. Okay, no problem. If the stopwatch is running, do nothing. Great, I've got that handled with the if statement. Okay, start is done. Move on to stop. If the stopwatch is running, okay, we have another if statement here. If this dot is running, what does it do? It sets the state of the stopwatch to not running. Okay. If the stopwatch is not running, it does nothing. Cool, I've got that handled with my if statement here, so I don't need to write any extra code in order to make that work. Okay, done with stop. So last one. Last one is lap. Okay, lap says if the stopwatch is running, all right, so that means I'm going to need some if statement in here. If this dot is running, what does it do? It adds a record of the current values of minutes, seconds, and milliseconds to the list of laps. There's a couple different ways that I could do this. I could write a string. I could, pass in an array of numbers. But given that I'm passing in multiple values, each of which has a different name, I think that the best way to actually represent this would be with an object. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create a new record, and it's going to have properties mins, sex, and millisecs. So mins is going to be this dot mins. It's going to be this dot sex. This is going to be this dot millisecs. All right. So this is going to create a new object whose values are identical to the ones of the current time. And it says then add this to the list of laps. So this dot laps dot push new record. Okay. Okay. If the stopwatch is not running, it does nothing. I think I've got that covered with my if statement. So that means that lap should be finished. Now I did a bad thing actually just now, which is I didn't test any of this as I was going. I really should have. In fact, as I was writing this, I should have done it for every single method. And anytime I needed to call something else, just subbed it in for a console log. But that's okay, because I can still muck around with it and test all this stuff. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to refresh the page. I've got my debugger on. So let's muck around with the stopwatch in the console and see if it does the things that we said it was supposed to do. Okay, so I can see stopwatch. There it is. Oops. Stopwatch. There it is. It's this object. It has some properties. Is running mins, secs, millisecs, and laps. So let me just test all of the things and see if it matches the specification. Update time values. Okay, so if it updates time values, it should do these things. It should increase milliseconds by 10 and do some other stuff when these levels get bigger. So I'm going to call update time values. All right, let's see if this increases milliseconds by 10, because that's what we said it's supposed to do. Okay, that looks good. That seems to work. I'm going to call this a bunch more times. How many times would it need to be for a second? I think 100. Okay, so I'm going to call update time values 100 times. Well, it printed 100 times, so that's a good sign. If I check the property stopwatch, oh hey, it went from 0 seconds to 1 second. All right, let's try this a little bit more. Rather than doing this 100 times, how many milliseconds are there in a minute? I think 60,000. So I'm going to say 100,000. This may take a short while. Why not, right? I can do that 100,000 times. All right, so that may take a minute to run. Actually, it'll take about a minute to run. A little bit more, because it takes a long time for it to actually print the stuff. So it's going slower. There's 20,000. Do. Come on, console. I believe in you. 100,000 isn't that many, right? All right, let me check the properties on stopwatch. Is it done yet? 63,000. No, still going. Okay, while this is running, why don't we pause for a second and just talk about what we've done so far. What were some of the practices that I used as I was going through this problem to try and address the issue? Just go ahead and call it out. What were some of the things that I was doing? What was a cool thing maybe that I did that you want to do on your own when you're working through code?
You use the debugger.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, you really use debugger to let you interactively work with the methods.
Yeah. It was, let me kind of like poke my head into a specific part of the program and see what was going on. Aaron, you had something to say also?
I mean, I was going to say the same thing, but that and just constantly console logging things to see that everything is passing where it's supposed to pass.
Yeah. Yeah, I try not to just trust stuff because I'm not smart enough. No, really. Like my code never works on the first try, ever, ever, ever. And so I shouldn't believe that it will. And I'll just like test it and see if it works. Okay, well, looks like the timing has finished. So let's take a look at stopwatch. Oh, hey, that actually was a lot more time than I accounted for. But it was 16 minutes, 41 seconds, and 10 milliseconds. Breaking down, Zach said breaking down issues into smaller ones. Cool, yeah, that's definitely a big idea with approaching problems like this. Okay, it looks like minutes, seconds, and milliseconds are updating. Cool. All right, I think that aspect of things works. So I'm going to try actually running the stopwatch. Well, first of all, I have some values in it, so I'm going to try resetting it. Stopwatch.reset. Oh, hey, stopwatch.reset works. It looks like I can restart the stopwatch from here in the console. In fact, this is a way of viewing the stopwatch in a sense. It's an interface through JavaScript that I can use to interact with this stopwatch thing and treat it as an entity in and of itself. Even if I had a different user interface, maybe I wasn't working in the browser, maybe I'm running this from the command line, right? Maybe I have a command line interface that's plugging into this thing. But regardless of what the interface is that it's using to communicate with the rest of the world, it still exists and I can interact with it here as its own thing. All right, so stopwatch.reset seems to work. Let's try starting the stopwatch. Okay, it called advance the clock. And did it actually advance the clock? No, because we told it not to. But it calls advance the clock. Let's try actually having it call advance the clock and see what happens. We'll have to refresh this. Go back. Okay. So we had to refresh the page, but that's okay. There's our stopwatch. We click start. Okay. Something happened with advance the clock. It called it because we know that advance the clock calls update time values. So it did something. If I say stopwatch dot is running, I wonder what value I'm going to see. Oh, stopwatch is running. Cool. Is it actually running? I don't know. I think it's not because we froze time, which makes this sort of a weird example for testing stuff out. But based on the fact that we called what it told us to call, I think we can assume that it will work the way that it's expected. Let's try calling stopwatch.stop. Great. When we called .stop, is running became false. And the last thing is lap. Let's see what happens when we call stopwatch.lap. Did that do a thing? That did not appear to do a thing. We may have made a mistake. All right, so there's a problem with lap. Good thing we checked. Let's take a closer look at it. if this is running, oh, I didn't check to see if it was running first. It's not. Let me start the stopwatch and then click lap. Okay. Now what happens? Hey, there's an entry in my laps array. Cool. So I guess we know both that when the stopwatch is running, it will do the one thing, and if it's not running, then it won't do that. Okay. I think we're pretty much done with stopwatch at this point. The only thing that we're going to need to do is, no, actually, no, that's already taken care of too. We might need to update the display at some point. It updates the browser. So we're going to need to do something with display, but we haven't written anything into display yet. So let's come back to this. Okay, let's go down to the spec for display. Split right. Okay, so the spec for display, we have 3 methods. And so let's start with, we know that update time display is going to call 0 fill. And it looks like since we want these values to be 0 padded too, I think update lap list is also going to call 0 fill. Because 0 fill's job was to add zeros in front of a number, which kind of makes sense. It's like if I have 2 seconds, I want it to show up as 02 instead of 2. That can be called 0 filling or padding, but it's a way of constraining or defining the minimum length of a number in terms of characters. All right, so let's start with 0 fill then, since both of these other 2 are going to call it. 0 fill, we have a number and a length. If number has fewer digits than length, it should return a number as a string padded on the left with zeros until its length is equal to length. That's complex. Let's break that apart. All right. If number has fewer digits than length, how could we get the number of digits in a number? What can we do to get the number of digits in a number? What does it mean to have a certain number of digits anyway?
I think you want to convert it to a string and then count the characters.
Oh, that's a clever idea. Yeah, if it's a string, then it's going to have 1 character per digit. So if I count the characters, that should tell me the length. All right, so I'll try that. I'll say number dot to string dot length. So if it has fewer digits than length, I do something. If it does not have fewer digits than length, it does something else. What does it do? Well, it says it should return number as a string unaltered. Okay. Cool. Returns number as a string. So let's come back over here. It should return number as a string, but padded on the left with zeros until its length is equal to length. Okay. So we know that there's a difference here between this and this, but we don't know how much it is. What if we count it? Okay, so if we're starting there, we can say for our I equals 0, I less than difference, do something. It says take it as a string and then pad it to the left. So why don't I'm calling number to string a lot here, so I think I'm actually going to replace that with a variable. I'm going to say var num string equals number dot to string. And I'll just replace these. Oh, actually, that makes things a little bit more convenient too, because it means that I can take numString and add some stuff to it. So it says padded on the left with zeros. So that means every time it goes through this loop, it needs to add a 0 to the left of numString. I think the easiest way to do that would actually just be to add a 0 and add numString to that. And then after we're done, return numString. Cool. I think this will work. Let's test it. All right, so we're here in the debugger. Let's try it out with a couple numbers. Display.zerofill. So we need to give it 2 arguments, a number and a length. So if I give it the number 2, and I want it to be filled to a length of 4, I think I should get back 0002. That's what I think I should get. Let's test it. Hey, so far so good. Cool. But wait, what if it's already that long? What if it's 1002? What does it do then? What it should do is just give me back 1002 according to the spec. And it does. Hey, great. Cool. I guess I know that zero fill works now. All right. If zero fill works, actually, before I move on, there is a quick way to refactor this that makes it a little bit simpler. Because we're returning numString in both cases as the final line. So I'm just going to pull that out. Because we're going to return numString no matter what. It's just a question of how we modify numString in the meantime. Okay, cool. So we know that zero fill works. So let's move on to update time display. Update time display displays the values of minutes, seconds, and tens of milliseconds elapsed in the DOM element by the display in the format 000000. So it looks like we're going to have 2 slots for each of these numbers. 2 slots for minutes, 2 slots for seconds, 2 slots for tens of milliseconds. There could be another 0 here, but it says that we're dealing with tens of milliseconds rather than milliseconds. So we're dealing with the first 2 digits of that. But it's being set to 2. So I think that means we're going to want to use zero fill to define the lengths of each of those strings to be 2 characters. So it says displays the values of minutes, seconds, and tens of milliseconds elapsed in the DOM element with ID time display. Okay. I guess the first thing to do is just to grab that element. Sorry, query selector. Query selector, time display. So that's going to give me the time display element. And it says it displays all the minutes, seconds, and tens of seconds in the DOM element. Cool. Let's take a quick look at the HTML for a second. Ooh, interesting. Actually, that may be a mistake. Actually, it looks like there's some stuff inside here already. There's 3 spans, one called mins, one called secs, and one called millisecs. I think I'm detecting a pattern here. Why don't I just change those values? So rather than selecting time display, I'm going to select mins, secs, and millisecs. It is called millisecs, right? Millisecs. Nice. Very convenient. Okay, so those are the 3 elements that we're going to want to grab. And it says it displays inside the DOM element. Okay, so we want to put stuff inside the DOM element. To me, that says inner HTML, because that's what you use when you put things inside of other things. So the inner HTML for this is going to be, it looks like minutes, but padded to 2 spaces. So I'm going to say this dot zero fill. Oops. Okay. Whatever the time is, to 2 spaces. Cool. So what are the values here? I think it's going to come from the stopwatch, probably. Stopwatch has mins, secs, and millisecs. So I'm going to change this to be stopwatch.mins, stopwatch.secs, and stopwatch.millisecs. Okay. Let's test this. The page is paused, but even with the page paused, we can still talk to the DOM. Let's try running it. Stopwatch. Let's set some arbitrary values for these things. Let's say mins is 5. $30 seconds. And let's say 80 milliseconds. These are arbitrary numbers, nothing special about them. If I look at stopwatch, has those properties now. Cool. So what happens if I call update time display? Does it take any arguments? Nope. Oh, shoot, where did that go? There it is. So I'll call update time display. All right. So let's take a look at the DOM. Yeah. We'll look at the whole time display. All right, so we'll pull up the time display, we get this thing, and hey, we have 5 minutes, 05, because it's smaller than 99, or than 100, 30 seconds, and 80 well, that's not correct, actually. That's not right. That should say 08. So we have a small problem with our code. We need to actually show the tens of milliseconds, not the milliseconds. I think we may need to do some division. Let's come back to the code. Let's try dividing this by 10. And we'll refresh all that. Okay, so I set some values for mins, seconds, and millisecs, and started the stopwatch. Cool. So we went through this, and let's take a look at the values of time display. Hey, it works now. It's 05, 30, and 08. It took our number of milliseconds, which was 80, and then it divided that by 8, so that it was by 10 rather, so that was 8. And then it filled a 0 in front of that 8. Cool. All right, so I think we're set with respect to time display. Let's just do one more, and then we'll jump into stand-ups, because I know we've run a little bit over time. So you may be wondering, what about blog? Well, we don't have time for it before stand-ups, but I will happily stay after class today to walk through blog as well. So if you can stick around, you're welcome to join for that. All right, so let's update the lap list. Update lap list. It displays the recorded laps inside the lap list element, displaying each lap with an LI element that displays the laps, mins, secs, and millisecs values, 0 padded to be at least 2 characters long. Okay. I'm going to be writing a whole bunch of HTML into here. There's a couple different approaches for how to do this. But I can either write all the HTML as a string and then put it in, or I can append a little bit at a time, or prepend a little bit of a time. Append means put at the end, prepend means put at the beginning. I think I'm going to choose the first approach, but I could choose the second one. The only thing that's a little bit scary about appending, if you're appending, is what happens if you append without knowing what you're appending to. For instance, let's say that you had a whole bunch of laps, but maybe we have the ability to delete laps in our application. Maybe if, like, something gets misrecorded or whatever. If we delete the lap on the data side, the display will still show it if all we're doing is append. So that's a problem. We need to make sure that the display is always in sync with the underlying data. What that means, essentially, is that we kind of need to clear the board every time before we start putting new stuff in. So let's do that. Query selector and its lap list. All right, so I'm going to set its inner HTML to nothing. That's going to wipe out all the content inside the lap list. Anything that might have been there before is going to go away. And I'm going to re-add all of the laps that my database, not my database, rather, my data storage system says exists. So what I'm going to go through is I'm going to go stopwatch.laps.forEach. I could use a for loop, but I prefer for each. So I could do one of two things. I could create an HTML string and then append to the HTML string. So I could write new HTML into this. And the new HTML would need to be something like li, followed by this dot zero fill, because it tells me I need to zero fill this stuff. This dot zero fill stopwatch dot mins. Plus, I'm just going to copy and paste stopwatch.sex. And with millisecs, I have to do that thing where I divide by 10. And I'll close that li. So what this will do is it'll add some text, just a string, for every one of oh, I'm sorry, it's not stopwatch. It's not stopwatch. I'm checking the ones on the lap. This should be lap.mins sex millisecs, because I'm showing that particular lap's data in this list item. So I could do that, and then I can add it all to lap list all at once. So that's one thing I could do. Another thing I could do is I could just have it append. That whole string. That could also work. Or I could go ahead and create new DOM elements and add those. Go through the process of adding nodes and subnodes. I think this is easier. Rather than having to go through like line after code of defining properties one by one, I can sort of just define them, set all these things all at once just by writing a string. It could actually go even faster if I did something like using a template string. One thing that is nice about this, about the first approach, is that I actually have a moment when I can look at all of the HTML before it gets added to the page. That might be beneficial at some point, not really for this, but it could be useful to be able to look at all the HTML and just check to see if that's correct, the new HTML. So if we were to do this with a template string, use a backtick, and another backtick. You guys saw these briefly. I think they're going to prove to be very useful for you as you begin to do things like this more and more. This process, what we're doing right now at this very moment, is called string interpolation. It means putting stuff in the middle of strings. So that's going to be the content of this HTML string, and then I can just pop it into query select into the element when I'm done. Okay, and that's going to be the last thing I do. So let's save and refresh. All right, so I'm going to add some laps, some pretend laps. Okay, so those are a couple of imaginary laps this might have. So let's see what happens if I call display dot update lap list. This dot zero fill is not a function. Oh, actually, I made a mistake here. Wait, no, I didn't. Not with these. It's with lap list. Here's the issue. I used this inside an anonymous function. That's a common failure mode. So I could create a variable, or I can just call it display. That should fix that. Okay. No errors this time. So if I use document dot query selector all, or just selector actually, and I query lap list. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of stuff in there. The spacing came out a little weird. I think it's because of how I was indenting this. But if I had just done a new line, that would have been fine. Okay, but yeah, it's got the times that I had in there. 2.5, well, actually, that's not right, because it should always be going up by 10. But 2, 5, 9, tens of milliseconds. Okay, it's 6 o'clock, so we've actually run really late. Let's jump into stand-ups if we can, and just make them real brief. So I'll go ahead and make some stand-up. I'm going to stop the recording here. We didn't quite finish. We didn't actually tie the things together in the event handlers, but that's a fairly small step from here.